Hello everyone. Before we get started, if you enjoy this story, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. These Korean horror stories take a lot of research and care to bring to you. Now, let's begin. There is a moment on the forest path when a father opens his mouth to call his son back from the shrine clearing, and the name will not come. The white paper streamers tied to the low branches are moving in a language older than wind, and the father's throat works silently, searching for a word that feels like it should be muscle memory, should be written in his chest, but instead floats just out of reach, like a face seen underwater. He knows there is someone he loves standing 20 meters ahead, near the weathered donation box. He knows this person has a history with him, a shape in his life, but when he tries to pin the exact nature of that shape, the edges blur, the streamers whisper. The light through the canopy has gone amber and low. The father takes a step forward and feels something very fine catch against his sleeve. It was summer break, and the drive out from Seoul had taken 2 hours through valley roads that narrowed as they climbed. Junho had insisted on this trip with a gentle stubbornness that surprised even him. His son, Min-jae, was 14 now and spent most of his waking hours bent over a phone or laptop, shoulders curved, face illuminated by blue light. Junho had suggested the hike to Murung Temple's outer trails, a place he remembered from his own boyhood, and Min-jae had agreed with the kind of sullen compliance that meant he was too tired to argue. They parked at the trailhead, where a faded map showed elevation arrows and dotted lines threading through pine forest toward a series of small shrines and stone markers. Junho shouldered the day pack with water and kimbap wrapped in foil. The air smelled of pine resin and earth still damp from morning rain. Cicadas droned in waves, rising and falling. A wooden sign at the trailhead asked hikers to keep to the path and respect the prayer sites. Min-jae walked a few steps behind, earbuds in, and Junho did not push him to remove them. It was enough, for now, that they were walking the same ground. The trail climbed gently, stone steps worn smooth in the center, where generations of feet had passed. Totem posts marked a fork in the path, their carved faces eroded by weather into suggestion rather than detail. Junho chose the left route, which the map indicated would loop past a small wayside shrine before descending back toward the parking area. The canopy thickened. Sunlight came through in coins and shifting bars. They passed a low stone cairn where someone had left a bottle of water and a handful of coins. Min-jae pulled one earbud out and asked if people still believed in these things. Junho said he thought it was less about belief and more about respect, about acknowledging that the land had been here long before apartments and subway lines, that there were older ways of being careful. Min-jae nodded without much interest and put the earbud back in. They walked. The drone of insects grew louder, then faded as the path bent through a stand of younger pine. A trail bell hung from a branch ahead, a small bronze thing meant to warn animals of human presence. But when Junho looked up at it, he realized there was no wind, and yet the bell's clapper was moving almost imperceptibly, ticking against the rim with a sound like a fingernail on glass. They reached the wayside shrine just after 2 in the afternoon. It was a small structure, more of a ledge, built into the hillside with a wooden overhang and a narrow shelf for offerings. The paint had long since peeled away. A donation box sat to one side, its slot dark and the wood warped by seasons. White paper streamers hung from the eave and from several low branches nearby, their ends cut into fringe. Junho set the day pack down and pulled out the kimbap. Min-jae stood near the shrine's edge, looking at his phone, but there was no signal this deep into the hills. He sighed and pocketed it. They ate in near silence. Junho tried to start a conversation about school, about Min-jae's friends, but the answers came in soft grunts and half sentences. Junho felt the familiar ache of distance, the sense that his son was a country he no longer knew how to visit. He wanted to say something true and useful, something that would close the gap, but the words dried up before they reached his mouth. Instead, he watched the streamers. They hung perfectly still. The canopy above was motionless. And yet, after a moment, one of the streamers began to sway, just slightly, its fringe lifting and falling in a rhythm that had nothing to do with air. Junho stood and brushed crumbs from his hands. He told Min-jae he was going to walk a little farther up the trail to see if there was a spring where they could refill the water bottles. Min-jae nodded without looking up from the donation box, where a handwritten note under plastic asked visitors not to touch the streamers or remove offerings. Junho started up the path. The trees pressed closer. He heard his own footsteps, the scuff of his boots on stone, and then faintly, the sound of paper moving. Not rustling exactly. It was drier than that, more like the sound of pages being turned in an empty room, or the tick of something very light brushing against fabric. He stopped. The sound stopped. He turned and looked back down the trail, but Min-jae was out of sight around the bend. Junho continued. The path climbed a short rise and then opened into a small clearing where a second shrine structure stood, older and more intact than the first. This one had name tablets arranged on a low shelf, wooden plaques with characters painted in black ink. Junho stepped closer and read one of the names aloud. The syllables felt wrong in his mouth, as though he was speaking a language he had learned incorrectly and was only now realizing the mistake. He frowned and tried again, but the feeling persisted. The paper streamers here were longer, hanging almost to the ground, and as he stood there, he felt one of them brush against his wrist. It was cool. It left a faint tingling, like static. When he returned to the first shrine, Min-jae was sitting on a flat stone with his knees drawn up, staring at nothing. Junho asked if he was all right. Min-jae looked at him, and there was a pause, just a beat too long, before he answered. He said he was fine. Junho asked again, more gently, and Min-jae said he thought he'd heard someone calling his name from farther up the trail. But when he looked, no one was there. Junho felt a prickle at the back of his neck. He told Min-jae it was probably just another hiker. Min-jae nodded, but he did not look convinced. Junho noticed something caught on the cuff of Min-jae's sleeve, a thin fiber of white paper, almost translucent. He reached out and picked it off. It clung to his fingertips. When he tried to let it fall, it drifted down slower than it should have, as though the air itself had thickened. The afternoon slipped toward evening faster than Junho expected. They decided to head back, but at the fork where the totem post stood, Junho hesitated. He thought the trail had bent left on the way up, but now he was not certain. The wooden sign was there, asking hikers to keep to the path, but he could not remember if it had faced this direction before. Min-jae said he thought they should go right. Junho agreed, though he was not sure why. They walked. The light dimmed. The cicadas fell silent. Junho realized he could not remember the name of the temple they had started from, and when he tried to picture the parking area, the memory was oddly flat, like a photograph with no depth. He glanced back at Min-jae, who was walking a few paces behind, and found himself struggling to pull up specific details about the boy's face. He knew this was his son. He knew the relationship in the abstract. but the particular shape of the nose, the exact color of the eyes, the way the mouth curled when he was annoyed, all of it seemed to be slipping behind a veil. He stopped walking. He turned. He said, "Are you okay?" But his own voice sounded strange to him, as though someone else were speaking. Min-jae did not answer. He was looking past Junho toward the trail ahead, and his expression was blank in a way that made Junho's stomach clench. At the next clearing, they found the second shrine again. Though Junho could not understand how they had circled back, the name tablets were there. The paper streamers hung longer now, or perhaps it was only the failing light that made them seem so. Min-jae walked toward the shrine without speaking. Junho followed. He wanted to tell Min-jae to stop, to turn around, to go back to the car, but he could not locate the urgency behind the impulse. It was as though the feeling was separated from him by a pane of glass. Min-jae reached out and touched one of the streamers. The paper made a sound like breath, and then she was there, not arriving, simply present, as though she had been standing in the clearing the entire time, and they had only now learned how to see her. She wore a white handbook or something like it, the fabric too clean for the forest floor. Her form was slender and still. Where her face should have been, there was only smoothness, an absence that the eye tried to fill and failed. Junho felt a pressure in his chest, a weight that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. This was not a stranger. This was the end of names. The paper streamers around the clearing began to move, all of them together, their fringed ends lifting and reaching. Junho turned to look at Min-jae and saw that his son's face had started to blur at the edges, the features softening, as though someone was slowly erasing a drawing from the outside in. Min-jae opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Junho tried to say his name and found he could not. The syllables dissolved before he could form them. The woman in white did not move. She did not need to. The streamers were her breath, her will, and they brushed against Junho's face now, cool and dry, each touch pulling something away. He felt his own name unravel. He felt the tether to his history, to the apartment in Seoul, to the woman waiting at home with the porch light on, begin to fray. He thought of her face and could not quite hold it. He thought of Min-jae's childhood, the first word he had spoken, the weight of him as a toddler in Junho's arms, and those memories flattened and grew distant, became facts without warmth. The streamers whispered against his skin, and he understood that this was not an attack. It was a forgetting. It was the forest taking back what had been brought into it, unnamed and uncareful. Min-jae reached for him, and Junho took his hand. The boy's fingers were cold. They stood together in the clearing as the last of the light drained from the sky, and the paper continued its work, strand by strand, touch by touch, until there was no one left to call and no names left to answer. The trail at night was shorter than it had been in daylight, as though the space between the shrines and the trailhead had folded in on itself, removing the middle distance. Their footsteps left no marks in the dust. By the time the forest opened onto the parking area, the car sat alone under a flickering lamp, and the two figures who walked toward it moved without speaking, without purpose, as though they were passengers in bodies they no longer quite recognized. The engine started. The headlights swept across the trees. The drive back was silent. When they reached the apartment, the woman who had been waiting looked up from the kitchen table and saw two people she almost knew. She asked a question and received no answer. She asked again. The porch light burned through the night. In the morning, she called the police and filed a report that described a husband and son who had gone hiking and returned as strangers. The officer took notes, but his pen faltered when she tried to give their names. Later, much later, she would find thin white fibers clinging to the doorframe. Though the nearest forest was hours away and no paper streamers grew in the city. This story draws on the folklore of the Dalgyel-gwishin, the egg ghost, a faceless spirit that appears as an omen of death and erasure. In Korean tradition, these entities are not always vengeful. They are thresholds, reminders that identity is fragile and that we are known only as long as we are named and seen. Junho and Minjae walked into a place where those names held no weight, and the space between them, the distance neither had known how to close, became the gap the ghost could widen. It's easy to let silence build inside a family, to assume that proximity is the same as presence. This story is a reminder that the people we love can become strangers if we forget to call them back, to say their names out loud, to see them fully. If you're listening to this and there's someone you've been meaning to reach, call them. Say their name. Let them know you still see them. That's all for today. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.